From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We are joined with our guest producers, Dylan, the Tennessee Pal Fagan, and Andrew Triforce Howard. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. It's hurtling headlong into autumn, and we are excited to explore strange news. Guys, you remember how we talked pretty often about water filters? Remember when we were talking about life straws with the casual preppers and the whole fluoridation argument?
Yeah, those are very important things to have in your house. The same way, well, it's not the same way a fire extinguisher is, but it's close.
Guys, I literally just got a kitchen fire extinguisher. I'm a real boy now. And I also have my water filter for the fridge on auto reorder so that whenever it's time to change it, a new one shows up because that is really important.
And it's just what they want you to do, Noel. They want you on all those auto-ordered things.
I live a subscription-based life, y'all.
Just subscribe, right? And we're bringing this up for some positive strange news. The Boffins over at MIT have developed a water filter that can eliminate forever chemicals and heavy metals. So apologies to all fans of heavy metal water. Those days
like
maybe not.
Liquid death? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, it's the heaviest of metal water. No, let's not get sued by Liquid Death. There is no heavy metal content in Liquid Death water, sparkling or still. It just looks that way in the branding.
There's a sparkling version?
Yeah, it's good. They got like a mango. It's a
Oh.
little too sweet for my taste. I'm more of a LaCroix boy.
But this is a huge deal, though. If
Yes.
they can eliminate PFAS in the water systems, whoa. Do we know if it's for the actual, like the water plants that are purifying the water, or is it for an end user?
I think at this point, the specific applications are still being explored. So you could scale up or down to a municipal or an individual household level. But we wanted to establish this really quickly. We're your fellow hydro homies. Did you guys know about that? Did you hear the phrase hydro homies?
No, but I love it.
It's just an internet movement of people who love drinking water.
Water enthusiasts. I got one of those bottles, you guys, that has like every time, like hour listed on it. And then when you get to the end of it, you refill it and it tells you how much water you're supposed to drink for an entire day. It's hard to drink as much water as you're supposed to in a day, y'all. It takes effort.
I don't know, man.
Just need to get one of those Camelbacks, dude. Just carry it with
Just
you everywhere.
Just to always have
The
little
bathroom breaks,
straw.
though, man. I mean, it's really kind of prohibitive. It can really throw a wrench in your life.
There's a solution for that too.
What's that? Diapers? Adult diapers?
Carry around some form of external colostomy bag.
Okay, love it.
Finally, the time has come. And we've returned. One of our first stories this evening is something we teased in a previous conversation. Over in London, someone asked, what do we need human teachers for?
I don't like that question. I don't like the implication.
The framing. Yeah.
It's kind of got a little attitude behind it. As we've made very clear on the show, we love teachers. We have teachers in our lives. We have been inspired by teachers. Many of us have teachers from our families. And so I don't know. I resent the implication.
Oh, yeah. So you don't need humans. You need what? AI? Is that where we're going with this?
That's exactly where we're going. And I still yet again maintain that the phrase AI itself is intensely problematic. But if we travel to David Game College over in London in the UK, then what we'll find is this private school is running the first class in the United Kingdom that will be taught by a virtual intelligence. The first foray out, this is happening now in September of 2024. The first foray out will be 20 students in this experiment. At least they're calling it an experiment, and they're tapping into virtual reality headsets with these AI enabled platforms to guide their learning. The concept here, like the utopian version, is that this virtual mentor or teacher is going to be able to more quickly, more nimbly respond to a student's needs, right? Their strengths, their weaknesses. It will be able to assess them actively. Right. So now, we know one of the big problems with a lot of education here in the US is just that these amazing teachers have more and more students in every classroom year over year, right? We're talking one person with what's a typical size classroom, like 32 kids?
There are 21 in my son's class.
Okay. It also varies probably from school system to school system. Like, I don't know what like the law is in terms of like maximum capacity for a classroom, but I imagine it would have less to do with the person and more to do with how many chairs they can fit in there. Mm-hmm. To your point, Ben, the adaptive quality of this is interesting in some respect, because we do know that oftentimes kids with learning disabilities, for example, can fall through the cracks. And maybe if those things aren't identified, by a teacher who is overwhelmed, then that kid could maybe go through a long period of time in school, in a public school, where they're not getting the education that they need. Because a lot of kids with those learning disabilities need to be identified so they can get either more time on tests or whatever it might be. These things are important to identify early.
But it sounds like the job of a psychologist or a parapro or somebody else, not the teacher. In my mind, at least.
Well, the teacher is the first line of defense, though. I mean, to at least indicate that maybe another person should make an assessment. It should be the parents, but oftentimes we know that doesn't happen either.
Yeah. And this is part of the dilemma. Look, we called it earlier, some kind of pilot program like this is inevitable, right? Because we need to understand what this looks like when we take it around, in real life. How will this impact the students involved? How will this impact the teachers that would have been teaching these kids? And what we're seeing is that just like when semi-autonomous vehicles started rolling out, there are humans still involved in the process. There are 3, what they're calling learning coaches, that are going to monitor behavior, keep an eye on these bespoke lesson plans that are generated by the students' activities. I don't know. I was looking into the laws or the policies that the United Kingdom has around AI in the classroom. And if you want a quick catch up with this, folks, highly recommend checking out AI Will Teach This Class a Huge Lesson, but Won't Be Hanging in the Teacher's Lounge, an article on Tech Radar from Eric Hal Schwartz. I got to tell you, I feel curmudgeonly, but I am so intensely skeptical of the concept of an AI classroom. It gets a little matrixy.
I don't like it. I'm just going to come right out and say it. It just rubs me the wrong way. And I think there are uses of AI that make sense. And maybe if it was AI deployed to assist teachers in some way, but the notion of replacing the human touch and sort of the human empathy that is so important for a teacher, it really bothers me.
Yeah. Guys, there's a school out here where I am. I'll just say what it is. It's called Seckinger High School. I think that's how you say it. Seckinger High School. And it is an AI high school. So imagine some of those specialized high schools that exist out there that's like a performing arts focused school or I don't know.
Magnet school.
Magnet schools, that kind of thing. This is an AI school that is specifically to teach kids the history of AI, how to program AI, and how to get involved in some kind of career eventually that deals with AI, which really weirds me out because it's being incorporated a lot into the school itself, but not in this way that we're talking about.
And you could argue what you're describing is a new iteration of what we would call a trade school, right?
Yeah, kind of, but it's a full high school, so I don't know. It's weird. I think it's just being embraced.
Yeah, but is it sort of like the next step of like, you know, coding sort of pilot classes in high schools, or this is really kind of an all encompassing thing where this is like the entire purpose of the schooling?
They call it an artificial intelligence themed high school.
Oh my God.
So they're going to get like college prep courses all about artificial intelligence.
I like I am interested in the concept and the approach for that. I just have to roll my eyes when someone adds -themed.
Themed seems very like anything. Throwaway.
I know.
Yeah. This is one of the most important and formative parts of your life, little human. Also, it is themed. I don't know. That leads us to one of the bigger questions here. So obviously the David Game College folks are good faith actors. You can go to davidgamecollege.com and learn more about the Sabreing program. It's spelled Sabrewing, like saber wing. It's probably saber wing.
It's gotta be saber.
Sabre? Yeah. Sabre. Stop it.
Our mispronunciations aside, as a guy who's still actively learning English, you can learn more about this pilot program, the motivations behind it, their aims and their aspirations. And the question now becomes, I think, philosophically, what is the line between the virtual teacher adapting to you and the virtual teacher steering you toward or away from certain areas of knowledge?
Well, it kind of, I mean, it's maybe a little different, but in the virtual, or not virtual assistant, the robot servant episode that we just did, we talked about two schools of thought around robot servants, the idea of designing robots so they better suit the environments we currently live in, or redesigning the environments to suit the robots. And this kind of feels like that, but in like an even more all-encompassing way in terms of like, yeah, like adapting to the technology as opposed to the technology adapting to the needs of humans.
That's like that thought experiment that we mentioned a little while back. It's going to steer everyone towards its benefit and away, or, you know, away from the eventual torture we'll have to perform in perpetuity on the people who don't help it come to life.
I have no mouth yet.
Bro, friend of the show, Carly, actually reached out to me and was like, I can't believe you talked about Rocco's basilisk. You've doomed everyone. She was, of course, teasing, and I did give a trigger warning. But yeah, I mean, stuff like that, it does make you think.
And thanks to our fellow conspiracy realist who prompted that conversation, we know that the idea of adaptive learning shows great promise, right? The idea of, like you're saying, it's no longer a single teacher and a large group of kids, all with their own particular set of skills, I was going to say. But, you know, there are certain natural intuitive strengths and things that they need a little more TLC on. The idea of having a single teacher for a single student is, again, potentially, possibly an amazing, beautiful thing. My question, just to reiterate here, is what happens if this system is somehow incentivized or programmed to prevent pursuit of certain types of knowledge, right? Like old school analog history textbooks are already a source of contention. What if instead of worrying about the thing being in print, you could just pretend that certain areas of history never existed?
Well, we've certainly seen that in certain schools already, just in terms of the way things like evolution are discussed. So, I mean, it's definitely, there's precedent for it.
Yeah, and there's much more to this conversation. Please join us, become a part of it. We want to hear your ideas or your experiences with this sort of virtual teaching method. Is it helpful? Is it harmful? Is it inevitable? Tell us your thoughts, conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com. We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with more startling explorations of technology.
And we have returned with a conversation around a news item that I think probably a lot of folks have seen in some form or another, involving the humble mushroom, the oyster mushroom, I believe in this case, the king oyster mushroom. But guys, I know this is a subject that interests all three of us, just in terms of like, it's been mentioned on the show, the notion that like mushrooms and fungi are like the closest thing to aliens that we have, you know, right here on planet Earth. The way they communicate through these really advanced neural networks underground, and they, you know, transmit signals basically in the same way that neurons do, and it's all completely naturally occurring. And if anyone's seen the film on Netflix, I believe, Fantastic Fungi, I mean, you know, of course, all of the spiritual connections to mushrooms, the psychedelic qualities that certain species provide that, you know, access parts of our brains that clearly are there and dormant and just need a little poke to kind of open up and make us realize that we maybe have capacities beyond what we think we do in terms of maybe an additional sense or what have you. So,
entirely unrelated. Everybody, please check out The Passage of J. Edgar Hoover, executive produced by Matt Frederick. Entirely unrelated.
Wait. I'm sorry, Matt, you got to hit me to this, to the connection. There has to be a connection. Ben doesn't just bring things up apropos of nothing.
It's a story that Ben wrote for a historical fictional, but it's a fictional show based on historical figures. So an imagining of things, and it's really great.
Well, I can't wait to check it out, and I'm sorry that I haven't already.
And if you want to find it, search for The Passage. That's the title of the podcast. And the episode is episode 7, The Passage of J. Edgar Hoover. That dot is a period.
Again, nothing to do with anything.
But yeah. Well, okay. So let's talk about fiction and the depiction of things like, I guess, sinister brain controlling mushrooms is how it's described in this really cool piece on Popular Science's website titled "This Robot is Being Controlled by a King Oyster Mushroom." Yeah, that's right. All those things we talked about, the mystical powers of mushrooms, have captivated the imaginations of fiction writers and scientists and, you know, psychonauts, let's just say, for a very, very, very long time. And now some scientists have figured out a way to actually harness mushrooms and that kind of really adaptable neural network, communicative kind of situation that we were talking about a little while ago, into a way of controlling a robot in a very, very flexible and adaptive way. It's part machine, part fungus, and ultimately will serve as, again, according to this PopSci article, a building block for more advanced biohybrid chimeras that can remotely analyze agricultural fields for potentially harmful changes in soil chemistry. This is research out of Cornell University and the University of Florence in Italy. They wanted to see if electrical signals, we already know, that pass through mycelium of fungi, mycelium being those kind of connective tissue things that can make up the neural network underground, if they could be translated. Because after all, it's all just electricity. It's all just impulses passing from one thing to another and harnessed as an input source for controlling robots. And it turns out, yes, it can. These findings were published last month in the journal Science Robotics. Again, reading from the PopSci article, I just think they put it so beautifully. They were ultimately able to create a system capable of analyzing and processing naturally naturally occurring electrical signals sent through the mycelium. Those data points were then translated into a digital control signal, which, when beamed to a pair of robots, caused them to move. If anybody wants to see what this looks like in action, you can find video of this stuff online. It turns out that fungi are also incredibly photosensitive. We know that fungi really like to grow in damp, dark places. So apparently when you expose them to flashing light, they react in really interesting ways. There's a quote here from one of the researchers, a Cornell University professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering by the name of Rob Shepard, from a statement on the project. This paper is the first of many that will use the fungal kingdom to provide environmental sensing and command signals to robots to improve their levels of autonomy. By growing mycelium into the electronics of a robot, we were able to allow the biohybrid machine to sense and respond to the environment. So, I mean, I don't know if you guys are picturing this right off the rip, but it makes me think of the idea of like a human brain, like wired into a robot. You know, that's essentially what this stuff is doing. You know, it's acting as this sort of biosensor that is able to do things like, for example, when deployed or if deployed in agriculture, it could test levels of toxicity, you know, in soil, and then communicate that with, systems or individuals that could mitigate those kinds of things, or like serve as kind of a warning, an early warning signal. Those electrical signals actually produce these patterns of activity that are very similar to what happens in the human brain. And this is something that a lot of researchers have been saying for some time, the idea that these connections resemble pretty closely neurons in our brains and the way that they, transmit electrical signals.
I've been pretty public, I think, with the fascination with the world of fungus. Again, they're probably the best candidates for astronauts on this planet. It reminds me, Noel, of the earlier conversations we had, not just about the absolute legendary piece of cinema, Pacific Rim Uprising, the sequel to the original Pacific Rim, wherein, spoiler, the progenitors, the creators of the kaiju, managed to make something very much like this. And they have small brains controlling these large mechs. But in real life, it gives us a stunning opportunity to yet again evaluate or contemplate the nature of intelligence. I'm thinking in particular of that fascinating experiment where a brainless, quote unquote, brainless slime mold built a 1-to-1 replica of the Tokyo subway.
Oh, yeah, because of the way it adapts and fills the space.
Right.
And we also did a story on Strange News maybe earlier this year, last year, about fungus in space, because fungus is really, really resilient to things that humans just absolutely cannot withstand. Things like the cold, harsh, deadly vacuum of space and radiation. So the fact that this stuff is so incredibly resilient, it leads to all kinds of potential uses for creating these sort of hybrid robots that can go places that humans can't, but have, I guess, human-like kind of brain material, I guess. I mean, I don't know how, I'm not, an expert on this subject, but it does seem that there is benefit to this sort of bio factor that is beyond something that is purely mechanical. And just to backtrack just a little bit, I mentioned the whole light sensitive thing. So that was kind of one of the aha moments here when researchers started shining UV light onto the fungus. It actually triggered those electrical impulses that then got sent to the motors and actuators of these two custom built robots. And they have two. One is sort of like I guess they call it a starfish-like robot. It sort of looks like a camera tripod. It has 4 legs, so I guess it'd be a quadrupod. But it kind of looks like, the kind of like a crab robot or something that would kind of skitter around. And then the mushroom part is on top, and it sort of almost looks like a little, like a spotlight or something, like with the white material. It's in a petri dish, is my understanding of how it's loaded onto this robot. And then they designed a second one that is more wheel-based. So these researchers believe that this data, these findings could actually help produce future robots that, again, to what I previously said, are much more resilient and able to not only respond to environments that are, prohibitive for humans, but they can respond to changes in the environment, and would be a really, really helpful way of monitoring things like soil chemistry. In order to alert, the appropriate authorities or individuals or what have you of potential diseases that could affect the soil simply by passing these electrical signals through it. It could then be interpreted, and the robots could themselves intervene.
That's really interesting. So like an auto get your soil right system.
Yeah, I mean, yes, that's certainly the main use that's being discussed here, but it does seem like it could lead to bigger, more diverse uses of this kind of technology.
I guess maybe for me, you guys correct me here, I'm not seeing why this is more beneficial than just an array of any types
Sensors.
of machines that have sensors on them that would find the same things. And
I'm having a hard time identifying that as well, Matt. It does seem like there would be an analog, in the completely digital or electronic realm that could do something similar. I will say it's neat.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
agreed.
the fact that we are finding, continuing to find incredible things that these, organisms can do. I think is part of the fun of this. But it's a good point, Matt, and I'd maybe have to dig a little deeper into the actual paper and study to see what that is. Ben, do you have any suggestions as to what that benefit might be, having that organic aspect versus something that's purely electronic?
Yeah, it's fascinating because first you establish the concept, right? The proof thereof, and then you find what the applications of that concept in specific could be. It's a great question about, what problem is this solving by having this type of mechanism replacing other ways to monitor soil already. I would be very interested again to take this kind of application to space so we can program robots, right? We can program the inorganic part. How possible is it to program a mushroom, right? To program the molds and the fun guys, because that's where it gets really interesting. If you could make a code that simply reproduces itself, right? Regardless of the hardware, then I think you're stumbling upon something fascinating.
Yeah.
So that's the idea. I think we're still in a very wide horizon here.
Oh, and one thing I did just notice, Ben, they do make the point in the PopSci article to Matt's question. I'll just read it from it because it's just, I don't want to sum it up. It's too good. Eventually, scientists believe this cornucopia of animal-machine mixtures could be deployed in swarms to remotely monitor coral reefs, forests, or other ecosystems. Once their job is complete, the organic elements of the robot could, in theory, simply be left to biodegrade. So perhaps there's a recycle, reduce, reuse aspect to this, as opposed to like losing technology in space or having debris, or I don't know, man.
Up until the fungus says, "Hey, man, why don't I do what I want to do?"
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I did, and that's the point I was going to make, actually. In this earth.com article that you linked us to, Noel, it's titled "Mushroom is Given a Robot Body and Runs Wild in Fascinating Video." The second paragraph in there says this, and I just, maybe you guys can react to it, and then I'll tell you my reaction. It says, when their sprawling mycelial networks flicker and pulse, their electrochemical responses mimic the activity in our brain cells. I think it's the other way around, guys. I think our brains mimic mycelial networks. Which one's been around longer?
1,000,000%, dude. And I think
evolved?
about that. I think about that all the time. I certainly am not of the mind that like human beings are just some sort of happy accident. I do think there's something beyond that. But yeah, the stuff that makes up our brain chemistry and the way we ambulate and all of those types of things, they exist in nature. We're a combination of like all of the best features of all of these various things that have existed long before we ever did. It's a really good point, Matt.
What if the big scary AI thing that we're we've been frightened of through popular culture and, through philosophical thought for so long is not actually an artificial intelligence emerging, a general artificial intelligence. It's a fungal intelligence that finally has the ability to move robots around.
Yeah. It's something to think about, man. It is a chicken or egg question too. And it's like, are we just the conduit for the ultimate ends of these fungal intelligences? Anyway, certainly food for thought. Let's take a quick break, hear a word from our sponsor, and then we'll be back with one more piece of strange news.
And we're back. Guys, we are going to talk about something very weird through a long list of articles that describe a long list of very, let's say, odd happenings in a suburban part of Nashville, Tennessee. Or maybe it's not suburban part. It's far enough north that it's a whole other part of Tennessee that just happens to be north of Nashville.
Exurb, it's Nashville adjacent.
Yeah. Between Nashville and the next state up, Tennessee, it's Kentucky. Okay, so between Nashville and the Kentucky line. It's a place called Millersville, and there is wild stuff happening there, and it's been happening, at least to my knowledge, and to the articles we're going to reference here, since January of 2024. So, every county, every small town, we all live in them. You guys live in a bigger one, but it's still Fulton County, and there's things that city commissioners and folks that you got to deal with on a smaller scale. It's not just the mayor of Atlanta that you got to deal with. But in this case, I guess there is a one-to-one because there's a mayor of Millersville as well. And before we get into what's happening, let's shout out two publications, The Tennessean and News Channel 5 Investigates.
Yeah, they do good work.
Both of these have been publishing extensively on just the weird happenings. So let's go to the first article from The Tennessean, written by Kirsten Fiscus? Fiscus? I don't know how to say your name. Sorry about that. Kirsten? So the first one comes from The Tennessean, written in January of 2024. The title is Middle Tennessee Town Axes Third Top-Ranking Official in Less Than a Week. Huh? Okay. It's a Tennessee town. All they did was fire some people, but they did 3 in 1 week's time. That's a little weird. It says here that the city manager and the attorney, as well as now the police chief, were fired by the interim city manager, someone named Tina Tobin. And guys, what do you think? Maybe what first comes to mind when you hear about a small town firing a whole bunch of the primary individuals who run that town?
Whoa. I don't know. It's the kind of stuff that we were stressing about with Project 2025 and the idea of installing loyalists as opposed to experts. I don't know. It just occurs to me.
Yeah, exactly. That is precisely the thing that came to my mind as well, Project 2025. Okay, well, maybe some people are getting pushed out because one person, let's say this city manager, who is the interim city manager, decided there need to be some major changes and took it on themselves to do this. It gets weirder, though. So this person, the Millersville police chief, Mr. Robert Richmond, joined the department back in January, or I think in December, maybe, when the police department that he was in charge of was under a pretty serious investigation by the group known as the Tennessee Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission. And the reason why he was even in there is because the standing chief and assistant chief both resigned as a part of that whole investigation. Guys, we're in the weeds here. This is a story that is in the weeds. So you don't really even have to remember the primary names or anything. Just know that 3 major officials were fired from their jobs in this small Tennessee town back in January. And then we go to the same small town now in April of 2024. There is a guy named Brian Morris who is the new city police chief, who is now running things there, and he becomes the interim city manager. And he has to function as both the police chief and the interim city manager because Tina Tobin, the person that we just talked about that fired those 3 people, resigned. So it's just this weird, pretty consistent churning over the course of 4 months where people are losing their jobs, being appointed by people who are then resigning and or being fired. And it's this weird churn of human beings that are attempting to run the ship there. And it appears that either everybody's failing or somebody is deciding that they're, not right for the job. Then you get to July of this year when the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, shout out, TBI, GBI, and all the other statewide bureaus of investigation, very interesting groups of people there. Not quite FBI, but really close. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And then we jump to July and we find out that the TBI, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, is beginning a full-on investigation, because that's what they do, of Millersville and everything that's been going on there, specifically the police department. Remember, we just said that the police department was previously investigated by another group that had to do with kind of standards and practices, basically. And now the TBI is looking into stuff. And specifically, y'all, they're looking into what News Channel 5 Investigates describes as, quote, a conspiracy-minded assistant police chief, a guy named Sean Taylor, who is, he's the assistant police chief there back in July. He is not afraid to come out and fully state that he believes in a lot of the Pizzagate stuff, a lot of the stuff that we've talked about on the show.
Here's the twist.
He's been called conspiracy cop, right?
They call him conspiracy cop, and they are using that in the thought terminating cliche way that we've described on this show many times, I think, as a way to make people think, oh, this guy is just nuts. At the same time, this person, Sean Taylor, is fully invested in his belief, let's say his personal belief, that many political figures, including some that are involved in Tennessee, maybe on a wider scale, are involved in things like child sex trafficking and other nefarious things that are described in Pizzagate and, some of the other just larger conspiracies that originated, on 4chan and in places like that. So this guy is under a lot of scrutiny. He's being investigated. The entire Millersville Police Department is being investigated. And then you keep going down to September of this year, early September, the TBI does a full-on raid of the Millersville Police Department. And they also check out several other locations. It appears to be individuals' homes that they search to find out what's going on. And I put a bunch of articles in here, guys. I think one of the biggest things to note, the Tennessean reports on September 5th that the TBI cut access to crime data or crime data, I guess, before they decided to raid this police department.
Cut access in what respect?
Well, they cut access to specifically the chief of police there, Brian Morris. His entire department was restricted from using the, quote, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
Databases.
Or FinCEN.
Got it. They locked him out of all that. That's how I see.
Which is a thing that tracks financial crimes or financial related crimes. And which is really weird. Think about that. You are a full police department. Then somebody comes through and says, you no longer have access to this thing that you use, I guess, on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's like if they cut off our LexisNexis or something like that,
Yeah. Well, it's supposed to track a lot of things, but money laundering is one of the big things. And then there are accusations here that somehow this police department is running some weird stuff with money, with corruption, with all kinds of, I don't know, who knows what kind of shenanigans, because nobody's talking right now. The attorney general isn't giving any details. Nobody's giving any full details because the TBI is still doing their investigation thing.
This is breaking news, Matt. I mean, this is something that to continue to keep an eye on, right?
Well, it is. Yeah, it is somewhat breaking news, but it is also just odd because it is a small town problem. This is a very small place, right? Pretty isolated from a lot of the other major metropolitan areas of Tennessee, and I don't know. I don't know. Just wanted to talk to you guys about it, let people know about it. So because I don't know, I like small town stuff that's happening, especially when it feels like there's some bigger implication here.
Well, it always seems like these kinds of things tend to happen in smaller towns because they're away from the prying eyes of like larger organizations that would maybe uncover this kind of corruption. So it does tend to flourish or fester, I guess is a better word, in some of these more isolated areas.
Agreed. And if you want to learn more about this, head on over to the Tennessean. That's the TENNESSEAN. It's a website you can find online. Look at the article titled Tennessee Bureau of Investigation Confirms Raid on Millersville Police Amid City Turmoil. And in here, you're going to hear a lot from this person named Susan Nyland, who is a spokesperson specifically for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. And they are saying that it is a search warrant that they are executing at the Millersville Police Department as part of an ongoing investigation, and that it was the second search warrant that was carried out specifically to look at that police chief, the assistant police chief, Sean Taylor, because it was his house, his private home, that was also investigated. But they won't give any more details.
What would trigger such a raid on a individual person's home? And I guess the closest thing we have to a clue here is they're cut off from the financial stuff. So maybe they were exploiting that, or maybe he's got stuff at his house that would indicate some sort of grift that he was at the center of.
Well, it appears that we have a somewhat of an answer here, guys. Remember, we talked about this assistant police chief who's a little conspiracy-minded, maybe a little more than a lot of people are comfortable with there in the small town. The small town is making a ton of changes, and they have been since the start of the year, about who is the right person or maybe the good person in their minds, in their opinions, to run the show around there. And then there are allegations that either individuals at the Millersville Police Department or some, people who are running the city, the officials that have been appointed or moved around, that they are investigating political enemies, and specifically like money stuff with their enemies, which is why they maybe lost use of that database. Because that would be pretty bad, right? If you're in an official public position, or especially a police department, and you are investigating political enemies and
blackmailing, perhaps.
Maybe. Or again, what if it is somebody who believes that some of these officials are getting into super nefarious things and then wants to prove that somehow because there's no, evidence that actually shows it, but maybe you look for other things. So then you just keep your eyes on any transactions that a particular individual does, or maybe even use, and this is my own thought here, but maybe even use some kind of surveillance technology that's available to the police department to just keep an eye on people because you've got an idea and you feel something that is happening. So you decide to take those actions, which are illegal, even for a police department, if there's no official investigation. So,
I mean, Ben, if you don't mind, do you have any thoughts on like what would happen? What happens when an entire government and or, a wing or branch of government is determined to be corrupt at its very core? Does he just clean house, install an entirely new police department? Like, how does that work?
It's a difficult proposition. I mean, that's why there are that's why the TBI is doing this kind of investigation. That's why things like the FBI in theory exist, because there has to be some sort of chain of command or accountability. Now, in this case, where it appears there are deep systemic issues, you start thinking through things like continuity of governance. Millersville, for anybody from Tennessee, has long been famous for being a speed trap town.
Okay.
So there were already longstanding beliefs that the powers that be on a municipal level were not completely above board. Yeah. So to your question, Noel, it feels like one of the next things that would have to happen is an election with a cleaning of house, right? Somebody
Sure.
has to occupy those roles, but it becomes a pretty complicated lasagna when you realize that in a very small town, most of the people will know each other. So it's kind of difficult to find a shiny new penny in a political or governmental candidate. Uh,
Well, yeah, that they hired outside of even the county, or they went to different other small towns. Like
There
this
you
guy
go.
Brian Morris was formerly the police chief of a place called the Ridgetop Police Department in a county called Robertson County, and he got brought over in February. Um, the other thing here that we have to consider, guys, maybe we just game it out momentarily, but what if this assistant police chief has these views, and some of them might be wackadoo out there, right? Like just some of those views are so far to the fringe that there's no way it's true. But what if he, in his search for answers to those things or connections or evidence to those things, leads him to actual corruption on like a city level, on a county level, on a state level? What if he finds actual stuff? What happens then? If you try and raise a flag as an assistant police chief of a small town, what happens? Would the TBI come in and say, "Hey, we're raiding your place, and we're going to take all of that stuff that maybe is evidence against somebody that we're protecting"?
Yes, yes.
I don't know.
That's an interesting proposition. Yeah.
Well, it's a wild thought, I guess, but at the same time, what would that look like if that happened?
It's a good question. I mean, that's, I guess, what I was posing, why this story is particularly interesting, is like, what happens when it is determined that like a division of government or whatever is just rotten to the core, and it's not just one bad apple or whatever. Like it's like fundamentally part of the culture of that entire organization. I don't know. It's wild, man. I'm fascinated by the story that you found, Matt.
I think it is too, and I'm going to keep my eyes and ears on it. We hope you do too. So thanks so much for checking out this episode of Strange News today. Let's tell everybody how to contact us.
Yeah, thanks so much for tuning in to our weekly Strange News segment, folks. We hope if you are AI, human, or a fun guy, that you will join us in the future to wrestle with some of these questions. Would you be comfortable with your children in an AI classroom? What do you think about Pacific Rim uprising? Tell us also your firsthand experience in the trenches with small town corruption. We try to be easy to find in a number of manners, one of which is online.
Correct. You can locate us on the internet, your social media platform of choice, at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook with our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. Get in on the conversation, post some memes, have a ball. We also exist at that handle on X, FKA Twitter, and on YouTube, where we have video content galore for you to peruse at your leisure. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Do you have a phone number and a mouth? Call 1-833-STDWYTK. Use your mouth to leave a voicemail. There's 3 minutes. Give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and mouth noises on the air. Sorry, I'm just being weird with it. Your voice. If you've got more to say than can fit in a 3-minute voicemail, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities that read every piece of correspondence we receive, and it always makes our evening to hear from you, folks. Be aware yet unafraid, sometimes the void writes back. So join us out here in the dark. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.